The eviction notice fluttered against the door frame. A sharp, dry sound in the quiet hallway. Miriam stared at the paper, her fingers tracing the edges of the printed warning until the ink blurred. She pulled her hand away, shoved it into her pocket, and checked her wallet for the 10th time. It was empty. The leather felt thin and brittle under her touch. She turned toward the bedroom. Inside, her 2 children lay on a single thin mattress. She walked to the kitchen, her footsteps heavy on the floorboards. She opened the cupboard. A half-empty bag of flour sat on the shelf. She pulled it out, felt the weight of it, and set it back down. The reality of the empty space hit her with a physical force. Miriam knelt on the hard floor. She gripped the worn Bible, her knuckles turning white against the cover. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the cool wooden surface of the table. "Lord, I am tired," she whispered. The morning sun offered no warmth. As Miriam stepped into the crowded market, the air smelled of fresh bread and roasted spices, a sharp contrast to the hollow ache in her stomach. She approached the first stall, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I am looking for work," she said. The owner did not even look up, merely shaking his head as he rearranged his crates. Miriam moved to the next, then the next. Each time the result was the same. A brief glance, a curt dismissal, a turning away. The noise of the market began to blur into a dull, rhythmic roar. She walked until her legs grew heavy and her heels throbbed. She stopped near a fountain, leaning against the cold stone to catch her breath, but the crowd pushed past her, indifferent to her presence. She checked her watch, but time had become a weight she could no longer carry. Every path she took led back to the same dead end. Her feet burned, her throat was dry, and the city felt vast and closed off. She stood in the center of the walkway, a solitary figure. The shadows in the alleyway deepened as the market noise receded. Miriam leaned against the brickwork, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. A man stepped from the darkness, his movements deliberate and quiet. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the street before he turned to her. He held out a thick, heavy envelope. The paper was stiff, the edges sharp. "Take this package to the city edge," he said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly murmur. "No questions asked. It pays 3 months of rent." Miriam stared at the envelope. The promise of security hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She looked at her own reflection in a nearby shop window, seeing the exhaustion etched into her features. She thought of the thin mattress at home and the empty cupboard. Her fingers twitched, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the straps of her bag. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of traffic. She looked at the man, then back at the envelope. Her hands trembled, but her stance hardened. "I cannot do this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She turned and walked away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The power failed the moment Miriam stepped inside. She fumbled for a candle, the match flare casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. She gathered her children close and opened the pages of her book, her voice steadying as she read aloud. The darkness felt heavy, but her words cut through it, rhythmic and calm. She prayed until the tightness in her chest finally loosened. The next morning, the silence was broken by a sharp, rhythmic rapping at the door. Miriam pulled it open to find an old neighbor standing on the threshold, a woven basket balanced on her hip. The scent of warm bread and crisp vegetables filled the doorway. "I felt led to bring this," the woman said, placing the basket on the table. Miriam watched her walk away, the weight of the basket a sudden, tangible reality. She turned back to the kitchen, her hands still shaking slightly, when the silence was shattered again, this time by the shrill, persistent ringing of her phone. It was her former employer. "We have an opening, Miriam. Can you start tomorrow?" The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the floor. Miriam looked at her children, their faces soft in the dim light. The room was no longer a place of fear, but a sanctuary of quiet. She realized then that the path had been cleared long before she reached the end of her own strength. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound, unshakable peace. She gathered her children close and bowed her head, the silence of the room deepening around them. There were no more questions, only the steady rhythm of their breathing. The light in the room dimmed, fading into a soft, velvet black. Across the screen, words emerged, clear and steady. "When the situation is tricky, trust the God who sees the end from the beginning." Below, the ancient promise appeared, Proverbs 3-5-6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding."